Hello, you again. Welcome to the Medicine Show. Now let's destroy the cell wall that we call finance. The function of finance is to control the body by controlling the body's physical needs. The question I will answer in this video is, how does finance control your body, or more accurately, trick you into allowing them control over your body? Finance uses fraud, or fictions of corporate government and corporations, to fool confused people who are ignorant of the natural law into giving away their power and rights. Finance, like government and religion, also uses its own language using terms that mean something completely different to most people. This is just one way they trick us into giving up our power and rights. When you can do that, then you can manipulate a perceived contract before it's even entered into, and after the fact simply by changing what the terms mean. Since most people are completely unaware of this, they obligate themselves to conditions that they need not be obligated to. Returning to the lawful power structure model, I explain more about this structure in the government portion of the cell video. From this we can see that finance deals entirely in the realm of legal fiction. So therefore, nothing they do is lawfully binding on its face. But it also becomes empowered purely on the basis that most are ignorant of the natural law, incompetent, confused, and irresponsible, in the same way that government derives its power. Finance functions. Finance determines the colorable value of real commodities. Finance controls the issuance of all colorable legal tender, both paper or electronic. Finance controls the markets through valuation of mediums of exchange. Finance converts all property into privileged possession. Finance throttles all colorable commerce. It applies interest, the real crime of usury, to all issuance of colorable legal tender. Controls the creditworthiness of all corporate entities, including governments. Establishes virtual depositories of virtual wealth. And creates the illusion of resource scarcity. The finance-government relationship. Finance issues legal tender to governments holding the individual corporations known as person created under the respective government's authority as collateral. Finance relies on government to prosecute through the legal system all those in breach of colorable contracts. Finance is party to all non-negotiable legal tender colorable contracts binding persons and commercial corporate entities to the statutes and code, fiction of law, of the respective governments. Government does not prosecute the real crimes committed by finance, those being fraud, theft, usury, and slavery. Finance holds government in check through creditworthiness and funding mercenaries and the government's military itself. Finance maintains the illusion of government regulation of the banks. The finance-religion relationship is thus: religion issues moral license to finance to commit the crimes of fraud, theft, usury, and slavery. Religion participates in the same crime through false charity and false tithing, utilizing the same colorable financial instruments to conduct church business. Religion is financed through these same colorable financial means. Religion supports finance through corrupt dogma, doctrine, and spiritual interpretation. The primary finance deceptions are that finance controls the ownership of all things that can be owned, that fictional value is real value, and corporate commerce is real trade. Now, we throw the word license, it's really important to know this. We throw that word around without really knowing what it means. License means permission to break the law. Okay, so religion issues these licenses to break the law. Now, it's interesting if one actually goes through and does some research to find out where marriage licenses actually come from and what laws those licenses allowed people to break. Similarly, and what comes up later, is the license to practice fiction of law or colorable law. That's what an attorney gets, is a license to practice law. Now, it's not law. It's because nobody has to practice gravity, and shoot, if you're practicing it, just means that you're not very good at it. The primary fatal financial vulnerabilities are that the colorable commercial contract is founded on fraud. The colorable commercial contract does not allow anyone the reasonable means to know upon what implied terms and conditions it's based. The colorable commercial contract attempts to bind one party in agreement to other secret parties that cannot be reasonably ascertained by the first party. Legal tender is not real consideration in a lawfully enforceable contract. Fictional corporate entities cannot have a meeting of the mind with any man, woman, or people. Fictional corporations do not have the mind to authorize anyone to act or speak on its behalf, and is therefore a criminal fraud committed by anyone who claims to act or speak on the behalf of any corporation. The ultimate weapons. All contracts created with the use of colorable consideration are colorable and therefore cannot be binding under natural law. Since all bank control of property was gained through the use of unenforceable colorable contract, the banks do not lawfully own anything. So let's look at some important deceptions by comparing what we believe is occurring with what is actually occurring. First, we believe we own property, and legal tender is cash we own. We, as the buyer, see that a seller has something we want, so we negotiate a deal and we give them our money for their junk. The money and junk change hands. We then believe we own the junk, and the seller believes he owns the money. That is not possible, because the buyer and the seller are both ignorant of natural law and are both irresponsible. Neither can even own property because neither is responsible, so they cannot exercise a right, including the right of property ownership. So how does finance create the illusion of property ownership right for people who cannot exercise any property ownership rights? This is what is actually occurring. Finance and government control all corporate entities, including the individual corporation they call person. I'll go into this a little deeper later. Each corporation enjoys exclusive privilege to control assets. It is not ownership. It just appears like ownership. That privilege can be revoked at any time. So finance is perceived to own everything that can be owned, and through the use of accounting keeps track of all transactions. So looking at the same business transaction, it occurs merely as a ledger entry. The buyer gets to use finance property because he discharged his debt. He didn't actually pay his debt. Legal tender is a debt-based instrument that stands in place of something that has real value. That is what the word tender means. Since legal tender is not tied to a real commodity, it is merely a debt obligation. A debt obligation is a promise to pay in real value, or an IOU. In this way, we cannot confer ownership of property because we have not made good on the IOU. Now, legal tender is a non-negotiable contract affording the buyer limited liability. That means if the seller accepts the non-negotiable contract, then he cannot use the commercial courts through the government's legal system to take back his property, because that is a condition of willing acceptance of the non-negotiable contract. That becomes a clever way for finance to steal property from people who lawfully own it. Once that owner releases the control of their property by accepting legal tender and trade, then that property becomes the perceived property of finance. The seller is presumed under natural law to have abandoned their property because they left it in exchange for legal tender that has no real value. That's a cute trick, huh? Since we cannot pay our debt using legal tender, then we cannot acquire property. We have no property. As proof, we pay what is called property tax, which is really rent to the perceived owner of the property. Stop paying rent, and the perceived owner takes it back. That is why most people are called owner of record, not simply owners. Now for the good news. Since banks use legal tender, they create out of thin air that has no real value, and fraudulent commercial contracts, then they have no lawful standing to claim ownership of anything because their contracts are not lawfully enforceable and they have not made good on their IOUs. You see, we have never been truly compensated for our time and labor because the banks have not made good on their promise to pay. We're not obligated to the banks because we paid in time and labor. They have paid nothing, and it is they who are the real deadbeats. Now for the fun part. Finance and government are fictions of law. Then what they call law can only lawfully apply to fictional entities. So how do you confuse people and trick them into believing the law applies to them? That starts real early. When we are born, we are given a name by our parents. The government creates an individual corporate commercial entity, specifically a corporate entity of interstate and international commerce. Take a look at the Interstate Commerce Clause in the Constitution to see why they did that. The colorable law applies to that colorable entity. That is what they mean by individual or person, not what you think an individual or person means. To distinguish this corporation from you, the real man or woman, its name is your name in all capital letters. That is clever in that to use it sounds the same. When we are born, a birth certificate or a certificate of live birth is created that marks the beginning of the corporate individual person. Do you really need a piece of paper to prove that you were born? They do not care who you are, but rather they do care about the corporation that you are presumed to be in. We are presumed to have willingly placed ourselves within this imaginary corporate vessel, and since we are inside, the fictions of law can appear to apply to us. Now, this is how ignorance really hurts and is not bliss. Say you're accused of injuring another person or a corporation either through an act or breach of colorable contract. You walk into the cheap seats of a government court. There is an attorney that claims to speak on the behalf of the injured person or corporation. In court, he represents the injured party corporation. There is another attorney that you believe represents you or represents you. Both attorneys and the judge hold a license to practice fictions of law. There's that license word again. They are permitted only to deal in fiction. The crime is they claim to speak on behalf of an invisible fictional entity. That is a fraud in natural law. They present the entity as substantive in court when it is not. See, they do not need to represent you because you are real. They only speak for fictions. When it is time for the hearing, the judge speaks a name. It sounds like your name, but he means the one in all capital letters. And since it sounds just like your name, you answer. And in so doing, you answer as being that corporation. That actually is a crime you commit against yourself. You hear the name your parents gave you, but the judge means the corporation under his jurisdiction. The corporate fiction that he has complete power over. When you answer as that corporation, then under natural law, by your word, you are bound. And you have, willingly, although in ignorance, created what is called joinder, or joined the real you with the fictional corporation. That is the moment you have willingly walked into a jail cell and accepted all the burdens of guilt. That is how they get power over you, because you said to them, I am your slave. Please put me in a cage and beat me if I do not comply. When you do that, the real you really has nothing to say about what happens in court. All they are doing then is pretending that you have a say. Once you are bound, the power of attorney is in effect, and he speaks not on your behalf, but on the behalf of the corporation you willingly placed yourself in. You have surrendered all your rights and power. It's like jumping in a shark tank and expecting the sharks to protect you from drowning. Most have no idea how this simple trick works. A judge and attorney lose their license to practice fictions of law if they even hint that this is what's going on here. If you know this trick already, then you can have some pretty interesting conversations with judges and attorneys. But don't ask them if it is true, because they will assume you do not know. And of course, they will not be the ones to teach you, even by example. So say you see a shirt that you like with your favorite brand. You buy it and take it home. Have you even thought about what the brand means? A brand is a mark of ownership, in the same way ranchers brand cattle to mark their steers as theirs. The brand shows you who the shirt belongs to. Is it your brand or theirs? What happens when they decide to take the shirt back, as is their right as owner? The corporation that made the shirt is controlled by finance. The legal tender you used belongs to finance, so you have no standing to claim ownership of property carrying somebody else's brand. Just to show you that what is going on is not some secret, there was a very popular singer named Johnny Cash, curiously enough. He has a song called 16 Tons, and this song says it all. Here's the beginning of the song. Some people say a man is made out of mud. A poor man's made out of muscle and blood. Muscle and blood and skin and bones. A mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Now, a company store in the past was created by large companies. These companies paid their workers in tokens that could only be used at their store to buy only the stuff at the store. When the worker left the company, then the stuff still belonged to the company. That is slavery, and was ironically outlawed. What's the difference between what finance does right now? There is no difference. See, Johnny was the man in black. He wore black all the time as a statement because he always felt like he was in prison all the time. When we trade our real time and real labor for stuff that has no real value and for things we cannot own, then that is slavery or servitude. Voluntary servitude is not against natural law. Involuntary servitude is against natural law. Are you beginning to see how merely removing your willing consent can completely change who suffers? You or them? I just want to give you another example to show you exactly how powerful word definitions and redefinitions can be. Recently, Hillary Clinton made a statement when talking about Libya. She said, "We didn't lose a single person." Many heard, with respect to the term person, man, woman, or people. What she meant was these corporations. Now, how do you lose a fiction? Lots of people went crazy over this, but they didn't realize that what Hillary Clinton said was the truth from their perspective. From our perspective, it looks like a lie, but we don't know the language that they're speaking to us. So I hope this introduction in this series thus far has caused you to think in different ways. I know there are others out there that are thinking in different ways, because I know for a fact that it's causing discomfort out there. Hopefully they'll use that discomfort for constructive purposes. But, hey, I can look at a track history and simply conclude that, hey, there's going to be some fear out there. See you in a bit. As always, thank you for being me.